Well, thank you, Virginia. I appreciate those very kind words, and we're so fortunate that you're down at the Capitol. You know, on a lot of issues, the things that people in this room want us to do, there are an awful lot of people who are being paid to lobby on the other side of it. And so we have a handful of folks that are so faithful and down there advocating for the things we all believe in. So I really appreciate your friendship and introducing me this morning. As was said, my name's Josh McKoon. I'm running for Secretary of State, and I tell everybody that I'm running for Secretary of State to make Georgia the fastest state in the nation to get a job and the toughest state in the nation to cast an illegal vote. That's what I want to do. And so, you know, how are you going to do that? Before I get into that, I do want to tell you a little bit about my background. My great-grandfather worked at the Eagle and Phoenix Mill in Columbus, Georgia, his entire life. My granddad dropped out of school in the 8th grade during the Great Depression, did a lot of different jobs to help support our family until he was called into service in World War II. He fought in the Pacific, came back to Columbus, married my grandmother. He had a lot of different jobs. He worked as a railroad conductor. He was a milkman. Basically got enough money together. My grandmother was working at Commercial Printers in Columbus, and they started a little grocery store on 5th Avenue and 8th Street in downtown Columbus. They had a lot of small businesses over the years. My dad was the first member of our family to go to college. He worked in that same Eagle and Phoenix Mill in the summertime to pay for tuition at Auburn University. And Dad went on to law school. He's practicing law today, and I followed in his footsteps. And I tell you all that just to say, my family has sort of lived what I think we all think of when we think about the American dream. Each generation's done a little bit better than the one before. We've been afforded great opportunities by the country and state that we've been blessed to live in. And so a big reason that I got involved in politics and public service is that I thought that in a lot of ways that the path to get that dream was narrowing. And I still think that there are issues around that as Secretary of State I can address. And so let me tell you about the first part of what I said to begin with, making Georgia the fastest state in the nation to get a job. We do a lot of things down at the General Assembly to try to stimulate economic activity. We introduce tax credit programs. We try to roll back unfriendly regulations. We passed a bill this year, as a matter of fact, to get the legal environment right to be able to launch rockets over in Camden County. So we're always trying to think of ways to stimulate the economy and make Georgia a better place to do business. In fact, if you haven't heard this before, you know, Georgia's been consistently ranked the #1 place to do business, the #1 state to do business in. And I've told people, being a politician and being at events all over the state, if I had $1 for every time I've heard that, I could self-finance my campaign. But there is another side to the story, and that is a Georgia State University study that was conducted about a year ago found that Georgia's gone from 33rd in the nation to 41st for middle income families per capita. And at the same time, we've gone from 21st in the nation to 15th for low income families. So what that tells me is that while we have a great environment for people that are maybe moving to corporate headquarters or looking to expand an existing business, for people who are just starting out or who are trying to figure out how to restart a career, grabbing that first rung on the ladder of economic success has gotten a little bit harder for them. So as Secretary of State, there's a great opportunity for conservatives, without doing anything with taxes, without using any of your taxpayer resources, to create jobs and stimulate economic growth. And the way to do that is to tackle this issue of professional licensing reform. And I just want to throw one statistic out at you to give you an idea of the kind of problem I think we're facing. Here in Georgia, the average cosmetologist, when they get their license, they've spent 350 days in training. The average EMT, the person who's going to show up at your house if you have a medical emergency, they have 31 days. So that tells me there's something structurally wrong with our licensing process. 40 years ago, 1 in 20 Americans had to get a permission slip from the government to work. a government license of some kind. Now it's 1 in 3. In Georgia, we have passed, over the last several years, new licensing for a variety of different professions. And what I think the next Secretary of State needs to do, and I think this is really job one, is to look at every one of these government permission slips to go to work and say, does this profession warrant a license? Number one. And some of them absolutely do. There are public health and public safety reasons that the government needs to be involved. But some of them, I don't know that that's going to be the case. But then number two, and this is where the real work will be done, is how do we make it easier for somebody to enter one of these licensed professions? Do we tier the license structure? Do we create apprenticeship opportunities? Do we do some other things so that there isn't such a barrier to entry? Americans for Prosperity did a nationwide study. I actually learned this statistic being up at the Faith and Freedom meeting back in June. But they did a nationwide study on licensing reform and found that 5.4 million new jobs could be created nationwide if we streamline licensing in all 50 states. So in Georgia, I mean, conservatively, we're talking about 200, 300,000 new job opportunities. And as conservatives, shouldn't we be about the business of connecting people with the dignity of honest, hard work? There are a lot of people that would love to be in one of these licensed professions, but they either can't afford the money that's involved to pay for the training, or they don't have the time to take away from what they're doing right now to put food on the table. So I think in conjunction with the legislature, job one for me is going to be reforming the licensure structure so that we can put more Georgians to work and do it right away. So that's the fastest state to get a job part of my talk. The second thing about making Georgia the toughest state in the nation to cast an illegal vote. There are a couple of different issues here. Now, folks on the far left say, oh, there's no voter fraud, there's never any problem with people trying to cheat the system. I mean, y'all know that's not true. We had an issue in Muskogee County, where I'm from, down in Columbus. Just a couple of years ago, we had a lady who works for a nursing home show up at the elections office. This was during the early voting period. And she shows up with 19 unsealed envelopes with absentee ballots in them. It just so happened the Republican member of our Board of Elections was in the office that day. That's the only reason these didn't get turned in. He started asking questions like, what are you doing with these? Why do you have them? Why aren't they sealed up? And she's like, well, you know, I work at Magnolia Manor in Columbus, and we wanted to help these people vote, and I was just assisting them by bringing these down there. Well, they start looking into it. They sequestered the ballots, and they go out to the nursing home and find out that a lot of these people are catatonic. I mean, they're not in a position to even physically mark the ballot, okay? Now, those ballots ultimately weren't ever counted. So somebody on the left would say, see, our system works. It's great. What that says to me is how many of those, it's like when you see a cockroach walk across the floor. You know, how many things are in the walls and that you're not seeing, right? So you got to have a Secretary of State who's going to be serious about the integrity of our electoral process. And what the far left does, you know, we recognized a couple members of the General Assembly who are here. We have a Republican majority in the General Assembly. The left's not going to be able to do what they want to do with our election code under the gold dome. So what they do instead is they run to an Obama judge and ask for the rules to be rewritten in the middle of the game. We saw that happen here recently with Karen Handel's race. They ran to the courthouse and said, we need to change the voter registration deadline. It doesn't need to be March 21st, it needs to be May 21st. Well, now, you know, we lost in front of the Obama-appointed judge, and 10,000 more people got put on the rolls during that time. And thankfully, you know, Karen still won the race, but they were doing everything they could to put the thumb on the scale. Now, there's a reason, and I will say this at the risk of maybe losing some support in the room, I'm a lawyer. That's my full-time day job. And I've practiced some election law. There's a reason we have appellate courts. There's a reason we have the United States Supreme Court. Georgia's Secretary of State, when something like that happens, we can't just say, oh, well, we lost in front of the Obama-appointed district court judge. We're just going to have to give up and go home. There are times where we're going to have to stand up and say, the far left's going to have to pack a lunch. The U.S. Supreme Court's going to have to tell us if they're going to rewrite Georgia election law. We're going to defend what the Georgia General Assembly has done to protect the integrity of our electoral process. In 2 counties, in Gwinnett County and Hall County last year, there were lawsuits filed to have ballots printed in languages other than English. Now, I want to be real clear about this because, the far left, they hear you say something like that, and the next thing is, well, you're a racist. Well, let me be real clear about this. I celebrate our culture of immigration and people coming from all over the world to seek opportunity in America legally. I'm all about that, okay? But I don't think it's too much to ask to say that if you're going to participate in the electoral process, you have to pass an English test to become a United States citizen. Then you ought to understand it well enough to vote, So that's something the next Secretary of State is going to need to be ready to defend, ready to work with the federal government on making changes to federal election law so that it is crystal clear that we don't have to make those kinds of accommodations. It's important that the government communicate in one voice. Now, on that issue, we have issued, and I've got a new number. When I've been talking about this for years and years, I've been saying Georgia's issued 20,000 driver's licenses to illegal aliens. Well, I got some new numbers from DDS yesterday. We've issued 48,000 driver's licenses to illegal aliens that qualified for President Obama's DACA program. So what does that really mean when we're talking about election integrity? Anybody know what motor voter is? Anybody ever heard of that? Where they register you to vote when you get your driver's license? And it is an opt-out. It is not an opt-in. So if somebody shows up at DDS, they may not be trying, it may be somebody who's like, look, I've got this DACA protection, I just want to be able to drive around on the roads. They may not even be realizing that they're registering to vote. But there are potentially 48,000 people who aren't United States citizens who are being automatically registered to vote. We got to look into that. And I've talked to a number of local elections officials. If you get out your Georgia driver's license, the only difference between your driver's license and the one being issued to these folks are the words limited term at the top of the license in very small print. And I've had the opportunity over the last month to ask a number of local elections officials, top elections officials in different counties about this. And they are surprised to learn this is happening, that these licenses are being issued. And I said, is anybody being trained on the photo ID side about limited term? And I've been told over and over again, no, that's not the case. So think about it. You get registered, you're on the rolls, you show up on election day, they ask to see a photo ID, and you give them a Georgia driver's license. Tell me where we're going to catch that in the current system. So we got to have a Secretary of State who's going to be running these things down, making sure that the appropriate training's done, making sure the list has been reviewed to try to scrub for these things. Because if we compare the driver's license codes, we can get into a whole separate debate about why they shouldn't be getting the licenses in the first place. I've been fighting that battle for a while. But at least as long as this is going on, let's match up the codes and make sure those people are being scrubbed from any voter list. That's an easy thing to do, but we need to be making sure we're actively doing it. The other thing I would say that I get questions about a lot are the voting machines. People are asking about the voting machines. A lot of it is because when the voting machines were sold to us, the lifespan of the machines, obviously any technology over a period of time is going to wear out. And we're approaching, if your county hasn't bought new machines, and some counties have, you're approaching the end of the usable life cycle of these machines. So what I've told everybody is we need an open and transparent process. We need to work with local governments on this issue. I think it is a mistake for anybody to say, if I'm Secretary of State, this is the solution to all our problems and I'm going to push it down on all the counties. We need to have feedback from local officials that are the ones that are administering the elections after all, and to say, what solution makes the most sense. Now, a lot of people have talked about some sort of paper audit trail or having a verifiable vote, getting a receipt out of the machine, sort of like an ATM. There's an electronic, solution potentially to that. I think the other thing that we've got to have on the table is doing what Maryland did. Maryland had touchscreen voting machines. They went back to the optical scan ballots. And for those of you, if optical scan doesn't get a picture in your mind, think about taking a standardized test. Or if you vote absentee, we still use optical scan for our absentee voting. You bubble it in, it gets fed through a scanner, and it's recorded on a data card. But then you've got the actual physical ballot, which is your built-in paper backup. From the people I've talked to, that is a less expensive solution than buying a new generation of electronic machines. So going into it, that would be my preference, but I think we have to have an open process. We engage all the stakeholders. We don't do it overnight because we also want to have time to roll this out. We don't want to acquire the machines a month away from an election and then try to deploy them in the same cycle. So it's probably a 2 or 3 year process where the machines actually come in 2022 at the earliest. So I don't want anybody, I think it's very important to set expectations with people and be honest with folks. And this is not something that's going to get solved with somebody snapping their fingers overnight. It needs to be a longer and more deliberative process. The other thing I'll just briefly touch on with you is the corporations division. So I've talked about licensing, I've talked about elections. The other thing that the Secretary of State does is corporations. The website that was rolled out several years ago had some functionality issues. As I talk to people who deal with the corporations division every day, a lot of those issues still haven't been worked out. There seems to still be a big difference between things that are filed online and things that are hand carried into the office downtown. So we've got to work on that. I think that's important. There are a lot of other little functions the Secretary of State's office has that I'd be happy to talk about if y'all have any questions about it. The thing I like telling people, the Secretary of State is the state's boxing commissioner. I mean, there are all kinds of little weird other functions the Secretary of State has. So I'm happy to talk about any of those. But basically, if you want to remember one thing about me, my name is Josh McKoon. I'm running for Secretary of State to make Georgia the fastest state in the nation to get a job and the toughest state in the nation to cast an illegal vote. I would love to have your support. The primary is May 22nd. You know, we'd love to have your vote, but we'd also love for you to be involved in our campaign. There's a lot of work to be done between now and then. You know, I've been a state senator. I've represented 4 counties. I'm learning 159 is a little bit bigger of an operation to deal with. So it takes a lot of folks to be involved with that. So I'd love to talk to you about being involved with the campaign, but I'd absolutely ask for your vote on May 22nd.
You can take a few questions if anybody.
Yeah, if there's time, I'd be happy to. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. The corporation, I understand why he did away with it. We used to get a little card reminding us that our registration was due. That doesn't happen anymore. We do it all online. Then if you don't remember, if somehow it slips through, then you get a letter that's saying that your corporation's being dissolved. There's got to be something in between there. You know what I'm saying? That, hey, did you forget? Instead of we're dissolving your corporation because you haven't paid your registration for this year. So.
Yeah, and I have heard that exact concern from a number of folks, particularly folks that serve as registered agents for a lot of these corporations, and they suddenly get something in the mail, hey, you're about to be administratively dissolved. And I think really what we're going to want to do is try and pull together, whether you want to call it a task force or a commission, but people that actually deal with the office and try to get all these, run down all these problems. I mean, one of the things that I'm inclined, that I at least want to have a conversation about is what exactly are we charging people the fee that you pay every year, right? I mean, I get why we pay a fee to start a corporate entity because there's paperwork involved and all the rest of it. I'm not really sure what return you're getting. I mean, to have something in there just to make sure that you're checking in and yes, I'm still doing business, yes, I still want to be in business, but I don't really know why we have to charge a fee for that, particularly when, and I think a lot of people are under the misimpression that when you pay a government agency, that money goes to that government agency. That is not the case for anybody that is suffering under that illusion. It goes into the general fund, and then we at the General Assembly spend it any willy-nilly way we want. So I think those are the kinds of things we need to all run down together with stakeholders and then go to the General Assembly with some recommendations. Yes, sir.
Hey, Jeff, I'd like to piggyback off that because it's actually worse than what Kathy's saying. If you mess up, okay, and then your company is dissolved, you pay to start it over again, you gotta go through the whole process. And now, if you've been a company that's been in business for 50 years, and someone goes check you out and you messed up, now you've only been in business for 1 year.
Yes, sir. I mean, it's a real problem. And there are also, frankly, there are liability concerns. You know, if suddenly your corporation's dissolved and you have an accident or something else happens and you get sued, that shield that protects you, depending on the circumstances, you know, you might find yourself individually liable. So there are a lot of reasons we need to make sure that's working a little bit better than it does now. Yes, ma'am.
Election question. The Karen Handel race decision by that court, did it apply only to that race, or is it gonna be more broadly applied in other races? In other words, have they really rewritten the law forever, or did they just rewrite it for that particular election?
So that's a good question. And to get in a little bit more specific about what happened, Georgia has a law in the books that says you cannot register to vote closer than 30 days from an election. And so the argument that was being made by the left in this case was, well, the runoff is a new election, okay, and that's why it needs to be extended. Well, let's be real clear about something. Runoff is a continuation of there's one election, and the runoff is part of that election. That's why when we take a Republican primary ballot, we can't vote in the Democratic runoff. So to answer your question, though, it's a precedent that's out there now, so we could face that litigation again. What I'm telling you is if we get that kind of lawsuit again, I'm taking that up on appeal, because I believe the 11th Circuit is going to take a dim view when we say, look, the reason we've got the 30-day out is to keep people from registering in the middle of an election, and we're absolutely we've already voted once, we're in the middle of an election. So we've got an issue now in that there's a precedent out there. There's not a consent decree or something that the state has said, oh, we'll do this every time going forward. But I think we've got to be prepared that that lawsuit's coming again now that they've been successful.
So speaking back to the opt-out for voter registration, so our Paulding Board of Elections is running into the same problem where DDS is kind of a new thing where the opt-out. But not only is it allowing, I think, illegals to possibly register to vote, it's also allowing people who are felons, it's putting them in a predicament a lot of times because you have a DDS worker, maybe they're not paying attention. Since it's an opt-out, you say, yeah, I don't want to register to vote. They do it anyways. Well, guess what? You just committed a felony, or you're going back on parole and just going to Dick Donnelly's office to look at this. And that's happened different times here already. And on top of that, every time you go to get assistance, if someone goes to get assistance somewhere, they have to be offered to be registered to vote. But what's happening is these people are desperate. They're going in and they get a pile of paperwork. Hey, fill this out and bring it back. Well, one of those pieces of paper, it's not described to them. You understand the circumstances that these happen, and they go and register, or they register to vote. Sometimes on that form, it's the child that they're trying to get help for is registered to vote. It's like, a 1-year-old or 6-month-old has been registered to vote because they're desperate. They feel like they got to fill out everything. These people aren't going to vote, so there needs to be not just fixing the opt-out, which is definitely a problem. We've increased our workload a ton at the elections office, but also trying to train or hold accountable the people who are trying to give assistance so that they aren't just saying, hey, you have to register to vote, because basically they're telling people, fill out all these forms and bring it back. Well, one of those forms is to register to vote. To me, it's against the spirit of what was it Section 5 or?
Right.
So there's a problem there too. So not only is it, putting felons possibly back, or people on parole, in a predicament, but people are trying to get assistance. It's just bombarding the elections office for nothing.
And I agree with you 100%. I think there are two things that need to happen there. The Secretary of State has to be engaged. We've got the presidency, we've got the Congress. A lot of these things are being pushed down from federal laws that have been passed in earlier years. We need to be advocating in Washington to say, we need some of these onerous things changed so that they work better for us. And then the other thing, and Secretary Kemp has had a problem with this because he hasn't had the resources he's needed, but the Secretary of State's office does have a law enforcement division, an investigations division, to look into issues about irregularities in elections. In my opinion, there needs to be more resources in that office, more personnel, because I've been engaged sometimes where complaints have been made and they just don't have the manpower to really come down and look into it. But if we could increase that area, I think we could help too, again, just like with what I'm describing about the illegal aliens, being able to scrub the list and be looking, what's the date of birth information. Another problem we've got is the New Georgia Project. I don't know if anybody knows what the New Georgia Project is, but it's an example of a number of far left initiatives that are cast as, well, we just want to register more people to vote. But what they do, and this is something I think we've got to change, they pay people not by the hour to go register voters. They pay them a bounty basically for each registration they turn in. So you wind up having registrations without addresses, with incomplete information, and because of some other litigation that's pending, the elections offices can't routinely sort of go in and purge that. In Muskogee County, we have 3,500 pending voter registrations that have missing information. They aren't able to contact the voter because there's not contact information on there. There was one story I was told about a gentleman who was down. We have I guess everybody has these travel ball tournaments. People come from all over the place. This granddad was down to see his grandson. Neither of them lived in Georgia. I think the grandson was 17 and a half, so he was just old enough to be registered. And these people kept bothering him at the game. And they said, we don't live in Georgia. And they said, it's not a problem, just fill out the paperwork. So they fill out the paperwork. This child gets registered in Georgia. When he tries to go vote for the first time in his home state, he's not on the roll, and it's too late because these people told him you're going to be registered to vote. So we have got to, I think, and other states have done this, they've outlawed paying people by the registration. And I think we've got to do the same thing. If people want to pay people by the hour, I think that's fine. Yes, sir.
Is there anything the Secretary of State's office can do, because you've got with the driver's license, whenever the feds finally decide to make it become enforced, the new driver's license is going to be required to get access to federal facilities to be able to fly and everything. Well, if we're giving them to illegals, that's going to allow them to have access to those facilities when the feds finally demand. I mean, they can already go in there now, but at one point it's supposed to be a security check. What can the Secretary of State's office do to try to help prevent that from becoming an issue as well?
Well, I think all of us need to pull together to change the law on the issuance of driver's licenses. I mean, I think what we need to do, if there's not a consensus to simply deny driver's licenses entirely, we had a compromise bill. I worked with Senator Tyler Harper from down in Osceola, the public safety chairman in the Senate, and we passed a bill out of the Senate that said, okay, we're going to give you a driver's safety card, which is clearly distinguishable from a driver's license. It was going to be oriented vertically instead of horizontally. No law enforcement officer, poll worker would mistake this for a driver's license. And unfortunately, we didn't get that through. But I think that is an issue that's the way we've got to address that, is we've got to change the law and get a license. Yes, Representative.
Thank you, Senator. Just to make sure everybody knows, the New Georgia project is not the one in Villa Rica where I represent.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me make that even more clear. Stacey Abrams, who is running for governor, started a political action committee with the same name. I'm sure whatever you're talking about is good for America.
They're just good community members. And by the way, that program registered 14,000 new folks in Douglas County. And if you see what happened to Douglas County last time, it's not a good initiative. And really quickly, I would support that appeal that you're talking about on this lawsuit. And I mutual friends and relations that you and I have, how registration period even came down through the courts without us appealing it. Was it a lack of resources? Because that precedent being set, you're exactly right. That precedent's now in stone, and it's going to be used for future elections.
So what I was told, and again, I wasn't in the courtroom, although I've talked to some people that were there. What I was told is they felt like, well, by the time we make the appeal, the election would be over, because you'll remember there was a vote on April 18th. There was a second vote on June 20th. I think the order was received sometime in late April. So even if we had appealed, the argument goes, well, you wouldn't have gotten a result in time. My response to that is we should have appealed and asked for a stay of the order, because that would have, at least, if we'd gotten the stay granted, no registrations would have been processed. Now, I want to be clear about this. You can register to vote 365 days a year. The question is, when does the Board of Elections add your name to the rolls and process that registration? But that was what I was told, is that they were concerned about the short window of time. But as you say, I think we're going to face it again. Yes, sir.
Read between the lines, Michael, what that decision said was the Georgia law say this applies. You fix. I'm hoping that the legislature, as a serious item in January. It's a matter of adding. Just exactly the way we intended before the federal court says, no, that's not what it says. Which is correct, that's not what it says. But you can say that. And it ought to be a real simple fix, and I hope there's somebody at the Capitol who's already doing that.
I have a feeling you're going to see that I have a feeling you're going to see that in the pre-filing period in November, because there is a lot of discussion going on about how to tighten it up.
Thank you.
Thank y'all very much.